All right. Let's see. 12 o'clock, and we will get started. Excited. So it's been a good couple weeks. Hope everyone is doing well. We are working through and on, we're going to be in Daniel 8. And so we are working through our end times Bible study. We started with Jesus's words in Luke 21 and Matthew 24 and Mark 13. And we worked through this timeline that we are putting together. So today we're in Daniel 8. And the reason we're in Daniel 8, let us go over here and take a look. And we are here because we have some words that are similar. So when we found the abomination of desolation in Daniel 11 and 12, we got that exact phrase, abomination of desolation. But we have something very similar. Jesus says to look in Daniel when we're looking for the abomination of desolation. And we have something very similar. We have this idea, what's called a transgression that causes horror. And if you were with me for the previous studies where we talked about desolation, this word horror is samem. It's the same word as desolation. This translates it as horror. So, we're going to take a look today and see if this is in the same context and should be applied to the abomination of desolation and Matthew 24. So, let us take a look. So, Matthew 24:15. If we go back and take a look here, we are dealing with, therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, and then it gives a whole list of what should you be doing when you see these things. So when we take a look at it and we go through this all of Matthew 24, we put together this kind of idea, this slide, and we get the abomination of desolation right here, right? And then we go through this tribulation, son of man, and then we went through and we did all of Daniel 11, 12, and 9. And we get this idea of this picture of this 1290 days, 1335 days. When we did the original one, we got this idea of this day of vengeance and the year of recompense. So we put together this whole timeline that is starting to be played out through studying the scriptures and going back into the Old Testament and referencing the things that Jesus was looking at. So now we're in Daniel 8. So let us take a look. Now, when we did just Daniel, the abomination of desolation in Daniel 10 and 12, we get this abomination of desolation here. And we get this idea that the daily sacrifice is going to get removed. And with 1290 days between them, with 1335 until a blessing. And then we looked at Daniel 9, and it suggests that there's some type of covenant that might be made. And then halfway through the covenant, there will be the end of sacrifices or the end of the Tamid. And what we're still looking for is there an attachment to Revelation yet? How do we hook this into Revelation? And we really, if you haven't seen it, really not there yet. We're really struggling to see where it hooks into Revelation. And we might get a little bit of a flavor of that today. And we'll also look at that. All right. So now what we need to do is when we look at Daniel 8:13, and we're going to read Daniel 8 because the rest of Daniel 8 really plays a big role in Daniel 8:13. But we're going to start in just Daniel 8:13. And it says here, for how long is the vision concerning the regular burnt offering, the transgression that makes desolate, and the giving over of the sanctuary and the host to be trampled underfoot? So in Matthew 24:15, we get the abomination of desolation. Here, an abomination of desolation is shekutz samem, which is just abomination of desolation. But here we get this word pesa, samem. So we get a different word, but we get this idea of desolation. And it's translated as transgression that makes desolate. So are these the same things? Let's take a look. So combining all of this, when Jesus tells us in Matthew 24:14, the abomination of desolation, we see that there was four references of something similar in in Daniel's book. And we already looked at Daniel 11:31 and Daniel 12:11. And we get the exact phrase. And Daniel 9:27, which we looked in last time, we get the pretty much the same idea, but it's broken up a little bit different. And we looked at on the wing of abominations will come one who makes desolate, even till a complete destruction, one that is decreed, is poured out on the one who makes desolate. So we get the same words there, and it really hints back over to this area. But Daniel 8:13, again, we're getting something different. So we have to ask ourselves, is it the same thing? And that's why we're going to do a lot more in context of Daniel 8 today. So our word, transgression, it's this word pesa. It's used 93 times in the Bible, and it's used in Daniel 12 and in Daniel 13. We get this idea, it's translated as transgression 83 times, offense 4 times. It's basically this idea of a rebellion, a sinful breach of trust or treason, something that you're doing against somebody else that's breaching an agreement or trust that you have. It's different than the word sin. So sin is actually a different Old Testament word, but it has that connotation there. It's built into the word. And basically, it's this idea of what is contrary to a standard human or divine, and it focuses on the rebellious nature of the sin. That you're actually being rebellious, you're actually going against what you should have been doing. Now, the one I want to focus on, we're going to look at a couple different scripture references, but the first one we're going to focus on is Exodus 23:21. And so let's go over there. Exodus 23:21. Be on your guard before him and obey his voice. Do not be rebellious towards him, for he will not pardon your transgression. So we will not pardon your transgressions, since my name is in him. This is the time when the angel of the Lord was leading the people of Israel out of Egypt. Don't be rebellious. It's this idea. Don't just actually go against what he's telling you to do, because God is saying, my name is in the angel of the Lord. And this is one of those pre-incarnate manifestations of Christ. The idea of this Trinitarian idea that we're already getting this flavor of. Um, so, anyways, but that's this idea of rebellion. We also look at Genesis 50:17. Thus you shall say to Joseph, Please forgive, I beg you, the transgression of your brothers and their sin, for they did you wrong. Now, now please forgive the transgression of the servants of God of your father. And Joseph wept as they spoke to him. So that there's this transgression that his brothers had committed against him when they sold him into slavery, when he basically made him as good as dead before his father, and they're asking him to be forgiven. This was a rebellious act. It was a sinful act, but it was rebellious. A little bit more of the Old Testament in Leviticus, and this is really we're going to look at two verses real quick here. Leviticus 16. Leviticus 16:16. He shall make atonement for the holy place because of the impurities of the sons of Israel and because of their transgressions in regards to all of their sins. So again, we get this idea of transgressions in regards to sin. So again, two different words here. Transgression has to do with the rebellious nature of sin. We can sin in a way that we just didn't know about. You're driving down the road and you're going 55 and it suddenly changes to a 35 and officer pulls you over and go, how fast are you going? 55. Did you know the speed limit was 35? No, officer, I'm wrong. It wasn't a rebellious act. You just didn't know that it had changed. It's that type of thing that you didn't know you were breaking the law. You didn't know you were doing something wrong. But there's sometimes that you know you're doing wrong. And that's something we need to confess. When we are know we're doing something wrong, those are the ones we really need to confess. Those are the ones we need to turn 180 degrees from. And some of those are the biggest struggles. I struggle with that. Many people, Christians and non-Christians, struggle with that. But transgressions in regards to all their sins. Thus he shall do for the tent of meeting. And these words here, this holy place, is going to play a big role today. this idea of tent of meeting, which is going to play a role. We're going to be looking at that today. We also see it in 1621. Then Aaron shall lay both of his hands on the head of the live goat and confess over it all the iniquities of the sons of Israel and all their transgression in regards to their sins. So, this is the idea of that scapegoat where two animals, and there's a lot chosen for one, and one's going to be sent out into the wilderness, and one is going to be kept in the camp. Um, and so, basically, you should lay on them the head of the goat and send it away into the wilderness by the hand of the man who stands readiness. So the transgressions, the rebellious acts are being laid on this goat that's being sent out into the wilderness. These are the ones that people are willfully. And so it's this idea that get rid of the rebellious acts out of our midst, send them away, get those out of here. But transgression again is different than the word sins. Is this rebellious idea. Now, we also see this in the prophetic word, uh, Isaiah 53:5. And this one is pretty famous for most Christians. But he was pierced through for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. So when it talks about that he was being pierced through for our transgressions, this is being pierced through for our rebellious acts, these things that we're willfully disobeying God about. I mean, that even makes me more it's even more painful sometimes to hear for the rebellious things. I often get this image of Jesus being struck by the leaders or being whipped, and I get this image of me being the one who's doing the whip, being the rebellious one who's actually beating up my Lord and Savior because I'm being before I knew I was being actually rebellious. And it terrifies me and it makes me sad that I would willfully do that to somebody, especially someone who is there for the forgiveness of my own sins, my rebellious acts. But it's that type of transgression. Isaiah 53:8, we get the same thing. By oppression and judgment he was taken away. As for his generation, who considered that he was cut off of the land of the living for the transgression of my people, to whom the stroke was due. So again, this idea of stroke, right? The cane, the whip, that was due to us. It was due to me, but he was the one that was took for the transgression of his people, and we should be thankful for that. But again, that's that word pesa. It's transgression. It's a almost a more serious form of a type of a sin. It's something you knowingly are doing. Ezekiel 18:28, and there's three verses we're going to look at here. Ezekiel 18:28. Because he considered and turned away from all of his transgressions which he had committed, he shall surely live and not die. So again, we're getting this picture of the scapegoat going away in the wilderness. We're getting this picture of Jesus taking our rebellious acts upon him. And because of them, and we turn away from them and we run away from them, we'll surely live and not die. But thanks to Jesus that he took those things. 30, Ezekiel 18:30. Therefore, I will judge you, O house of Israel, each according to his conduct. Repent and turn away from all your transgressions, so that your iniquity may not become a stumbling block to you. Cast away from you all your transgressions which you have committed, and make yourselves a new heart and a new spirit. For why will you die, O house of Israel? I have no pleasure in the death of anyone who dies. Therefore, repent and live. Look, it's this idea that God is making a world of peace. But if you are in a world where God says to do something as simple as don't eat this piece of fruit, but you have a rebellious heart and a rebellious action, How does he keep you in that world? How does he keep you in a place where you're not humble enough to say, I'm wrong, you're right? That's what he's giving us a picture of. This is what he wants from us. Whether you're Christian or not Christian, he wants us to turn away from our rebellious acts, those transgressions that are rebellious. So this is giving us a picture of this desolation, that it's something more than just an act. It's a rebellious act. It's an act that says, I want my way, that I'm going to rebel against you. Let's look in more places. Ezekiel 33:12. Ezekiel 33:12. And you, son of man, say to your fellow citizens, righteousness of a righteous man will not deliver him in the day of his transgression, right? So again, it's more than sin. If you say you're a righteous person, but then you rebelliously act, your righteousness doesn't save you anymore because you're rebelling. You're rebelling against what's that various righteousness. As for the wickedness of the wicked, he will not stumble because of it in that day when he turns from his wickedness. Whereas the righteous man will not be able to live by his righteousness in the day he commits sin. Again, so he's also relating sin to this idea of transgression. Transgression is a type of sin, but it has a rebellious nature or aspect to it. So that's one of the things we need to understand. That's this word pesha. So that's what we're dealing here, pesa. Pesa. All right, last scripture here. Now we also see this word transgression in Daniel 9:24. Oh, we may have looked at this before. 70 weeks have been decreed for your people in your holy city to finish transgression, to finish this rebellious acts of sin, to make an end of sin. So finish transgression, this rebelliousness, make an end of sin. We're also going to be looking at this idea of anoint the most holy place, Daniel 70 weeks, but we're going to as well. But transgression, this is the other place it was used. All right. So now that we understand what a transgression is, what this word pesa is, the next thing we have to ask is pesa the abomination? Oh, this is the word sema. So this is just this word desolate. I just wanted to show you this. This is what we had looked at before, that makes desolate. So this is that rebellious acts that makes desolate. And you can see that we saw that in Daniel 9:27. And the winged abomination comes one who makes desolate. Daniel 11:31, they'll set up the abomination that makes desolate. Um, so this idea is going to be setting up. One is going to come that makes desolate. So we're starting to get an idea of looking at, is Pesa the abomination of desolation, and clearly from the way that I'm leading, I'm going to suggest that it is the same type of it is the same thing, but I'm going to show you more of why I think that is, and we're going to talk about that. All right, so this word again, desolation, it's samem, and we see it in all of these Daniel verses, this idea of desolation. All right. Now, first of all, the transgression and abomination are both related to sacrifice. So if we read, let's take this moment and read all of Daniel 8. And we're going to go through it somewhat quickly, just so we have a context of what we're dealing with. So, in the third year of the reign of Belshazzar, the king, a vision appeared to me, Daniel, subsequent to the one that appeared to me previously. So this is after Daniel 7. I looked into the vision, and while I was looking in the citadel of Susa, which is in the province of Elam, I looked in the vision, and myself was beside the Ulai Canal. When I lifted up, verse 3, then I lifted up my eyes and looked, and behold, a ram which had two horns standing in front of the canal. Now the two horns were long, but one was longer to the other, and the longer one was coming up last. And I saw the ram butting westward and northward and southward, and no other beast could stand before him, no there was anyone to rescue him with his power, but he did as he pleased and magnified himself. Okay, so what does that tell us? We're going to scroll down here. Interpretation. The ram which you saw where the two horns represent the kings of Media and Persia. So, Media and Persia, these are the rams. One horn was longer. The king of Persia was more important and prominent than the king of Media. Okay? So, we need to understand that. Bump, 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 bump. Now we're going back up. So, verse 4, I saw the ram budding westward, northward, and southwards, and no one could stand before him, nor was anyone to rescue him from his power, but he did as he pleased and magnified himself. While I was observing, behold, a male goat was coming from the west over the surface of the whole earth without touching the ground. And the goat has conspicuous horn between his eyes. And he came up to the ram that had two horns, which I had saw standing in front of the canal. And he rushed at him in his mighty wrath. And I saw him come beside the ram, and he was enraged at him. And he struck the ram and shattered his two horns, and the ram had no strength to withstand him. So he hurled him to the ground and trampled on him. And there was no one to rescue the ram from his power. Then the male goat magnified himself exceedingly. As soon as he was mighty, the large horn was broken, and in its place came up four conspicuous horns to the four winds of heaven. So we scroll down, the interpretation. The shaggy goat represents the kingdom of Greece, and its large horn between his eyes is the first king. The broken horn and the four horns, again, when it's in italics here, the word horn is actually not in the Bible. So it's actually the broken and the four arose in its place, represent four kingdoms, which will arise from his nation, though not with his power. So this is what the idea of what we're going to get. This is the context of what he's trying to let us know. And then he gives us the real meaning of the vision. What is it that we really want to be able to know? Out of one of those four, came forth a rather small horn. It was a tiny horn. It grew exceedingly great towards the south, towards the east, towards the beautiful land. And it grew up to the host of heaven and caused some of the host and some of the stars to follow the earth. And it trampled them down, and even magnified itself to be equal with the commander of the host. This word commander here we looked at in Daniel 9. It's actually also prince. It's the word sar. It's commander of the host, the sar of the host. And it removed the regular sacrifice. So this is that word tamid. It's the same thing that we looked at in Daniel 11. Same thing we looked at in Daniel 9. This idea of this sacrifice. And the place of his sanctuary was thrown down. And on account of transgressions, the host will be given over to the horn, along with the regular sacrifice, and will fling truth to the ground and perform its will and prosper. Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to the particular one who was speaking, how long will the vision about the regular sacrifice, about the tamid, how long will that apply? While the transgression that causes horror, this possible abomination of desolation, so as to allow both the holy place and the host to be trampled. Remember, we looked at holy place when we were back looking at Pessa. And he said to me, for 2,300 evenings, mornings, then the holy place will be properly restored. All right, so we're going to stop there and we're going to go back. So, when we are looking here at this, asking the question, is the transgression and the abomination, are they the same thing? They're both related to sacrifice. We see this, that the tamid is mentioned 3 times in Daniel 8, 11 through 13. That little horn removed the tamid from him, in the place of his sanctuary was thrown down. On account of the transgression, the same word here, pesa. So on account of the pesa, this rebellious act, to the ground, perform its will and prosper. I heard a holy one speaking. Another holy one said to that particular one who made the regular sacrifice apply. That's the question. That's how we get to this 2,300 days. So this is related to Daniel 9:27. It says he will put a stop to sacrifice. Now that word here is actually zabah, and in grain offering. So it's a little bit different. Zabah. But Daniel 11:31, when he does away with the regular sacrifice, that is the tamid. And from the time of the regular sacrifice, tamid is abolished. And that's where we get the 1290 days. So the first idea that the sacrifice is also involved in this transgression, which makes us think that it's related to the abomination of desolation. Now, next, we also get this idea that Daniel 8 mirrors Daniel 11:31. And so I'm not going to go back through all the scripture verses, but I've narrowed it down here for us to take a look at. In Daniel 8, we get the little horn arises. In Daniel 11, we get a king arising. In Daniel 8, we stop the Tamid. Oh, here we get a transgression that causes desolation, a rebellious act. And here we get an abomination, something that's set up, something that's, remember, it talks about it being, when we look back at abomination, this idea of idol, something that's being put in place of God. In Daniel 8, we get it that this little horn magnifies itself to be equal to the prince. I change it to prince of the host, the Tsar. In Daniel 11, he magnifies himself to be equal to Jehovah, to the Lord, to God himself. And then when we look at this idea of prince of the host, remember how we looked at the angel that had the name of God in him, the thing that was bringing Israel out? We're going to, when we look more in depth at this prince of the host idea, we also see that this prince of the host has this suggestion that it's the pre-incarnate Christ. So anyways, so these I would say are very similar, or same type of act. Daniel 8, he performs his will and prospers. And we see in Daniel 11, the king will do as he pleases a little bit and prospers. In Daniel 8, the holy place, the Kodesh, is trampled. And we're going to look at sanctuary and Kodesh today as well. And here it says it will desecrate the sanctuary. So we actually get the sanctuary being desecrated. In Daniel 8, this little horn is insolent and skilled in intrigue. In Daniel 11, he uses smooth words to turn some to godlessness. In Daniel 8, he will destroy mighty men and the holy people. In 11, many countries will fall, and the holy people will fall by sword and flame. In Daniel 8, he is broken without human agency. In Daniel 11, he will come to his end and no one will help him. So there's a lot of mirrors. There's a lot of things that suggest that these are the same person and the same events, and these are the same things that are happening. That makes us think that this transgression is also the abomination. All right. So I think if we look at and ask, is the Pesa, the transgression, the abomination of desolation? And I'm gonna say yes, I think it is. And we see that because of this idea of desolation and what exactly it does, what the event does. The abomination causes desolation, and this transgression, this rebellious act causes desolation. Now, when we look at desolation, honestly, I mean, there was many different things that could cause desolation. And so that doesn't necessarily mean it. But I think we start taking the evidence that we also see that this person also stops the Tamid. Now, this is the regular sacrifice, but we saw that the regular sacrifice was stopped by Antiochus Epiphanes. So could that be it? And we're going to look at this. The sacrifice was stopped in 70 AD when the temple was destroyed. Spiritually, some people from Daniel 9, when we looked at that last week, would say that the sacrifice was stopped when Jesus was sacrificed on the cross. And that stopped the regular sacrifice. So there's other things that people could suggest. And I think one of the most striking ones, though, is how much it mirrors Daniel 11. Um, and so it really suggests that when you start taking these things together, that they're probably the same issue, the same situation. And what's the response? So what would that mean? What would the implications mean? If that is the same, it would mean that there's something that's going to happen after 2300 evenings and mornings. And so we're going to look at that as well today. All right. So how does Daniel 8 apply to the end? Let's say you're going to say that Daniel 8 applies to the end, and it is also the abomination of desolation. And I'm not done with saying with looking at why I also still think it applies to the end, where we still have more evidence, but we're going to look at it from a different perspective. So let's say that Daniel 8 does apply to the end. Okay. So how do these 2300 mornings, evenings, and mornings apply? Are they days and years? And so there's four primary views. There's going to be the historical view. There's going to be a historicist view. So the historicist, this is primarily promoted by the Seventh Day Adventists. They say that the 2300 mornings and evenings and mornings are years. So we're going to touch on that. There's a historical future view, which basically says that part of it was fulfilled in the past, and then the part of it will be fulfilled in the future. And then there's the all future view. And I'm going to show at the end that these two, for all intents and purposes, probably don't make a difference between which one it is. And so I think it's one of those things. Remember, we talked about tension. It may be something we have to look for both of them. We may be surprised if it winds up being all future. We shouldn't be surprised, and if it winds up being historical and future, we shouldn't be surprised at that. But I think those can't be reconciled with these two views, and I'll show you that here in a sec. So, let us take a look at just real quick about days and years. So let me show you a couple of things. Remember, oh yeah, no, I'm not going to do that yet. I'm going to do that next. First, we're going to look at this, the history behind what's going on. So what is the setting of Daniel 8? We already looked at this idea of Media and Persia clashing with Greece. And if we look at Daniel's prophecies, we see that Daniel prophesied in the first year of Belshazzar, which is about 556 BC. Daniel 8, the one we're in right now, was prophesied in the third year of Belshazzar, which is about 553 BC. Daniel 9 was in the first year of Darius, which was about 539 BC. It was the year that Babylon was defeated. And remember, it's the kingdom of the Medes and the Persians. And there were two kings, but one was greater. The Persian king was greater than the Media king. And that's why specifically in Daniel 9, if you take a look here in Daniel 9:1, let's take a quick peek. Boom, boom, boom. He is called in the first year of Darius, the son of Ahasuerus, of Median descent, who was king over the Chaldeans. So he was king of Median descent, and he was king over the Babylonian part of the empire. But the empire, the Medo-Persian Empire, was even larger, and there was two kings. And so then in Daniel 10 through 12, we see it's in the third year of Cyrus, which is actually only 3. Cyrus is the king of the Persians. He was the greater king. He was even larger. Susa. Okay. Then we see that the rise of Alexander in 336 BC, he's about 20 years old. He rises to power, and the Persians are eventually defeated. Medo-Persia is defeated in 330 BC. And so we see that idea of that clash of the one with two horns, the ram with two horns, two horns, and the one with one horn, and they clash together, right? And so this is Greece, this is Media Persia, and they clash. And so eventually the Persians are defeated. Now, we also see this idea in Daniel 9. So if we go back here, and it's very interesting. Boom, 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 boom. Boom, 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 boom. Daniel's praying, he's praying, he's praying, he's praying. Now, while I was speaking and praying in 9:20, confessing my sin and the sin of my people Israel, and presenting my supplication before the Lord, while I was speaking the prayer, the man Gabriel, whom I had seen him previously, came in my extreme weariness, the time of the evening offerings. Okay. Oh, that's not the one I'm looking at. Is that in 10? It's in 10. Oh, am I in 10? Okay, let's go to 10. Make sure. Do, 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 do. Okay, yeah, that's in 10. All right, Daniel 10. Sorry about that. All right, um, Daniel 10. Daniel 10:12. He said to me, "Do not be afraid, Daniel, from the first day that you set your heart on understanding this and humbling yourself before God, your words were heard. I have come in response to your words. But the prince of the kingdom of Persia was withstanding me for 21 days, and behold, Michael, one of the chief prince, came to help me, for I had been left there with the kings of Persia." Okay, so he's been left with the king of Persia, but this is the interesting part. Mm, 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 mm. Down in verse 20. Do you understand why I came to you? But now I shall return to fight against the prince of Persia. So he's going to be fighting against the prince of Persia. So I am going forth, and behold, the prince of Greece is about to come. So this is in the third year of Cyrus that Daniel 10 is being given. And he's coming in, and the prince of Persia was withstanding him for 21 days. Michael had to come and help this person be released. And now he's going back to fight so that the prince of Greece can arise. Um, and then he said, "There's no one that stands firmly against these forces except for Michael, your prince." So no one else stands firmly. The reason I show that is because way back here in the third year of Cyrus, they're already fighting against the prince of Persia in anticipation that they'll be defeated, which is almost 200 years later. And he says, "Behold, soon, so that they can come. So the Greece is about to come forth. So, but it's 200 years in our time frame. But I just find that very interesting when we're looking at the whole time frame of everything that's going on. And the other really interesting part about this is that there was what's called the Second Persian War, the First Persian War. Persia, remember when we're reading about Persia in Daniel 8, it talks about that it's going against all the different people, that it's going, if we look at this, um, the the ram was butting westward and northward and southward, and no one else could stand before him. When Persia was in its mighty power, it kept fighting and trying to fight against Greece. It kept getting involved in Sparta and Athens, and trying to get those two groups to fight and then trying to take over it. It would keep fighting against those, and it eventually led to the Peloponnesian War, where Athens and Sparta wound up fighting. If we go back here, much between this time period, we get these wars between Persia and Greece going back and forth, and led to eventually the Peloponnesian War. The Peloponnesian Wars, when Athens and Sparta would fight. When Sparta finally had Athens succumb, and so Athens had been part of one league, I think it was the Delian League, and Sparta had been part of another league, and Sparta finally defeated Athens. And eventually, Alexander's father was made kind of the leader over both of these combined leagues just a couple years, about 3 years before he died, to go and fight against Persia. And Alexander, who was about 18 years old when that happened, there was only one battle between Alexander's father and Persia before Alexander rose to power. And then most everyone knows what Alexander did. Alexander went and conquered all of Persia, down into the south to Israel, down into Egypt, and became this huge thing, all spreading all the way almost to India. Just a huge, huge empire before dying a short time later, after he basically defeated all these people. Um, and he died basically without human intervention at a very young age, which is why a lot of people think that there is a historical view that this is all just happened in history. So, all right, so that's kind of a background to everything that's happened. So let's take a look at this idea of conflicts that we see. So in verse 3, we get the ram, which had two horns. Okay. And we see that in verse 20, the ram, which we saw, represents the kings of Media and Persia. And we saw that the ram was budding westward and southward, and no one could stand before him. And I talked about the Second Persian War that would last it for almost 50 years, from 449 to 449 BC. So it mirrors a lot of what we're talking about in verse 4. And then in verse 5, we get this goat, right? Behold, a male goat was coming from the west, had a conspicuous horn between his eyes. The goat represents the kingdom of actually Javan, which many people call Greece. Javan are basically the coastland peoples of Greece, and had a large horn between its eyes, which was its first king. And I mentioned that Alexander rose in 336, but they made this pact called the Hellenistic League that was in 338, and it was related to what was happening here, related to this Persian War. It was also related to the Peloponnesian War, which happened just 50 years before, because Persia kept interfering in Greece. They kept hiring mercenaries from Sparta and Athens, and if they couldn't defeat them, they would get them to fight amongst themselves. And so the Hellenistic League was in response to what Persia had been doing. So we get the conflict then. We get the conflict of the goat became beside the ram, was enraged and struck him with horns. So we get this idea in history. But as soon as the goat was mighty, the horn was broken, and his place came up four. This actually doesn't say four horns, it says four hazut. And that Alexander dies in 323 BC. So Alexander dies just 7 years after he defeats Media and Persia. And four hazuts, four people groups arise. All right, so now let's take a look. So they kind of give again history. So we have three primary views. Three primary views of this historical, that it all happened in the past. That it all happened in the past. The little horn is Antiochus Epiphanes, and the 2300 days is the time that the Maccabees needed to restore the temple. The historical and future interpretation is everything up to the little horn is past is historical events. So everything up to the little horn happened in the past, just like what we saw. And that the little horn is yet future, and Antiochus is a type, just like Daniel 11. And the 2300 days is yet future. And then the all future approach is everything from the Battle of Media Persia is still yet to happen. And in that type of scenario, what people say is Iran or a group over in Iran, Iraq, a group will attack modern day Turkey, and they will have a large battle and wage war. And then out of that, Turkey will win. And then the leader at that time will fall, and then four groups or four kings will arise out of that, and then the little horn will arise out of them. So that's how that is viewed. All right. Now, what I'm going to say is basically these are the same, that we should be looking for the little horn. When we talk about Jesus, when he talks about it in Matthew 24:15, he says, look for the abomination of desolation. Before that is wars and rumors of wars. But what we really want to see is this abomination of desolation. That battle, remember, if we go back, everything that happened here of between these two battles happened over about a 200-year period. If you look from 556 BC to 336 BC till the Persians were finally defeated, and then 7 years later, so these are some long time periods. This war and this battle, it could happen quick. Iran could attack Turkey, and it could all happen within 2 years, 4 years, 5 years. Who knows? but that's still all wars and rumors of wars. It doesn't necessarily have to happen that way. And so um, I think the thing we're still looking for is we're still looking for the little horn. If we see it happening, okay, but we're still, just like I showed last week with the sacrifices, they could start and then stop and then start and then stop. What we're really looking for and what Jesus tells us to look for is we're looking for this little horn because we don't know. We can see the sacrifices start and then stop, and we go, oh, it's 1290 days or 1260 days, and then the Antichrist or something like that. Um, so we have to be very careful. We need to be watchful. But when we pronounce these things, when we make it, this is what was going to happen. I think until we see this little horn, I'm going to say it again. We need to be very careful about what we're saying because we can put out false prophecy, false warnings. We can cause a lot of stress and worry when what we should be focusing on is not being rebellious, loving those around us, loving people, preaching about Jesus. All right. So, whether we're dealing with historical or future, now, whether it all happened in the past, I'm going to show why I think that that's not the case, and also why I think that the historical. Okay. So, I guess I didn't put that slide in here. Um, where did I put that? Let's see here. Did I cut all that out? Did I somehow? I did. Did I put it way down there? How did I move that way down there? I moved the part talking about mornings and evenings all the way to the bottom. I don't know how I did that. I was moving things around, and I guess I moved it around. Okay, well, we'll talk about that here in just a bit. So right now, we're going to talk about the historical view. We're going to talk about why I think the either historical future or the all future approach is correct, and why the historical is not correct. All right, so we get an idea of the history. And you can see how this historical event looks like it could very well be applicable if we apply with Antiochus, 2,300 days. But Daniel tells us something in here. Now, there's two pieces of evidence. All right, so why do I think the historical future approach is correct? Because of the ties that we see initially. And we see the ties in Matthew 24:15 first, which is that the abomination of desolation is going to be in the future. And then we looked at Daniel 11:30 and Daniel 11:30. And we come over here that forces will arise from him that desecrate the sanctuary and the fortress and do away with the regular sacrifice. Now, this happened in the past. Remember, Antiochus desecrated the temple sanctuary and the fortress, and they did away with the regular sacrifice. And he set up an abomination of desolation. The problem is that Jesus says it's yet in the future. Jesus tells us that this abomination, when he talked about this in about 30 AD, 33 AD, whichever year you want to put it, but he was saying it was still yet future. So either Jesus was misinformed or was lying, but if you believe Jesus' words, you have to say that this is future. And if this transgression of abomination is yet future, then it didn't completely happen in the past. It's not all completely fulfilled in the past. So that's kind of the external evidence that's around it. Um, so some people want to say that, oh, well, Daniel 11 is what Jesus is talking about that's happening in the future, but Daniel 8 actually happened in the past. So Daniel 8 happened in the past, but Daniel 11 is in the future because this is the transgression that causes desolation. Well, we also have some internal evidence. So let's look at the parts we haven't read yet. So we already read Daniel 8 through 14. We read this part that talked about when we ask, how long will the vision about the regular sacrifice, the Tamid, apply? While the Pesa that causes Samem, the transgression that causes desolation, so as to allow the holy place and the host to be trampled. And he said, 2,300 evenings and mornings. Okay, now let's keep going. He says, when I, Daniel, had seen the vision, I sought to understand it. We want to understand things. We want to know. Behold, standing before me was one who looked like a man. And I heard the voice of a man between the banks of the Ulai, and he called and said, Gabriel, give this man vision, understanding of the vision. So, number one, there's a person here that looks like a man that's telling Gabriel to give him understanding of the vision. So there's two people standing here. And I'm going to continue to suggest that this other person that's standing here is the pre-incarnate Christ. It's the commander of the host. It's the prince of the host. It's the same person that is in Daniel 10 that's saying, I'm fighting against the prince of Persia, or being withstood, and that's going to fight against Greece. And the only person that stands with him is Michael. So he's telling Gabriel to give the man understanding. So he came near me where I was standing, and when he came, I was frightened and fell on my face. But he said to me, Son of man, understand that the vision pertains to the time of the end. Okay, pretty clear. It pertains to the time of the end. Now he was talking with me. I sank into a deep sleep, my face on the ground, and he touched me, saying me stand upright. He said, Behold, I'm going to let you know what will occur at the final period of indignation, for it pertains to the appointed time of the end. He's telling him again, it pertains to the appointed time of the end. Okay. One more time. Come down here at 23. In the later period of their rule, when the transgressors have run their course. So in the latter period of their rule. So he's letting him know this is the latter period, it's the time of the end. So let's look at this. What does that mean? Well, end, time of the end. Okay, boom. So we get this phrase at Ketz. It is used 5 times. So it's a phrase, time of the end, and specifically at Ketz. Word Ketz is used 67 times, which just means end. But the phrase specifically where it says time at Ketz, time of the end, is only used 5 times. And it's used all 5 times in Daniel. I look through all the scriptures, and that's the only time I can find that specific phraseology found in all the Bible. So we see it the first time, we see it in Daniel 17. And so let's take a look at Daniel's. Son of man, understand the vision pertains to the time of the end. We also see it in Daniel 11:35. It says, some of those who have insight will fall in order to refine, purge, and make them pure until the end time. Now, this is the NASB, and it says end time. But the phrase, actually, if we go back and we look at our English Standard Version, we get here at the time of the end. So it's actually at. So as you see the number 17 here, and you see the number 18. So the actual order is et Ketz. So here is the word here. I should zoom that in. Let me zoom that in because that looks small. Boom. Let's zoom it. All right. And what did I do? Annual 33, 34, 35, 34, 35, in case people couldn't see. There he is. Et Ketz. So here we are. Boom. And you can see the numbers here, which tell you the order of the way the words are. So we get the same phrase, time of the end. So NASB. I'm getting a little bit frustrated sometimes with the NASB lately, as I've been seeing how it doesn't necessarily translate phrases consistently. All right. So second time that it's used. So this is talking about, we will go back to our smaller language here. So some of those insights and fall, refine, purge, and make them pure until the end of time of the end, because it is still to come at the appointed time. The time of the end still to come. We also see it in verse 40. And it's the NASB again, because that's the way I have it set up. At the end time, the king of the south will collide with him. So this is that king that arises, And the king of the south will collide with him, and the king of the north will storm against him with chariots. So this little horn that arises, that's a rise out of the king of the south and the king of the north are actually going to fight both against him based on what it's saying here. But again, it's at this end time. We also get it in Daniel 12:4. But as for you, Daniel, conceal these words and seal up the book until the end of time, till the time of the end. So it's again at Ketz, it should actually say until the time of the end. That this book is actually Daniel 10, 11, 12 is actually sealed till the end time. We're not going to know how this completely plays out until the time of the end. We're not going to know whether it's the all future where Iran, Iraq attack Turkey and they fall apart, uh, or if that just doesn't happen because that's all in the past, and the only thing that's going to happen is that this little horn or the king will arise. It's going to make it really challenging, and we need to begin. I'm going to say we need to be flexible. We need to be open minded. We need to not get scared, not worry, because Jesus, God, has this under control. We need to be able to trust him with our very lives. That's what he's asking us to be able to do. Some are going to be refined and purged. They're going to stand up at the right time. All right. At Ketz, last one, Daniel 12:9. And he said, go your way, Daniel, for the words are concealed and sealed up until the end time, the time of the end. Um, so it's really interesting how this phrase et ket is used. Now, just to do a little bit more in regards to this word end. Now, there is also, we read in part of it that there's this appointed time and moed. We're going to look at that. We find that when we look at this word et ket, that the saints be made white. The king of the south and the king of the north will storm against him, and the book will be sealed until the time of the end, until the end times, the et kets. When we look at the word just kets, this word end, we also see it used a few other times in Daniel without the time of the end. It's just used as end. And we see that in 5 additional verses. And we're going to look at those here in just a moment. But before we do, we're going to look at this idea of what end signifies, just how it's generally used in the Bible. Because if it's used 67 other times, are all of those times just related to the end times? Or is it used a different way? So Genesis 6:13. Then God, end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. And behold, I'm about to destroy them with the earth. So he's going to make the end of all flesh. So we see that in Genesis, Noah. Genesis 8:6. Then it came about at the end of 40 days, Noah opened the window of the ark which he had made. So this is just saying the end of 40 days. So it's just related to the end of a time period. Isaiah 9:7. There will be no end, no kets, to the increase of his government or peace. So when Jesus installs his government of peace, there's going to be no end to it, and he will be on the throne of David and over his kingdom. And this is one of the things I talked about when I talked about the millennial kingdom, and how I talked about how his government, it was established with the Holy Spirit initially, and how that kingdom continues to expand, and it'll expand into the millennial kingdom, and then it'll expand into the eternal kingdom where there'll be true peace, where it only be people that are no longer rebellious to God. But again, just there's no end, no kets. Jeremiah 34:14. At the end of 7 years, at the kets of 7 years, you shall set free his Hebrew brother who's been sold to you, who served you for 6 years. So it's just, again, at the end of a time period. Ezekiel 7:2. And you, son of man, thus says the Lord God, to the land of Israel, an end, The end is coming. The Ketz is coming on the four corners of the land. There's going to be a time period where the land is coming to an end. We see that they talked about in Noah, where flesh was coming to an end. We see this again. Now the end is upon you, and I will send my anger against you. I will judge you according to your ways and bring all your abomination, your shakuts upon you, your abominations, the idols that you have set up. Habakkuk 2:3. For the vision is yet for the appointed time. It hastens towards its goal. It will not fail. For though it tarries, wait for it. It will certainly come. It will not delay. This word here is ketz. They had translated it here, appointed time, which is a little bit unfortunate. This is the one that I talked about. This is moed. So this is actually moed, which is translated as appointed time here. Here is ketz, right down here. It hastens to its end. It will not tarry. So there's an appointed time. So they translated it, and that's where, see, if it hastens towards the goal, the NASB translated it as goal instead of end. And that's why, again, I'm thinking of in my future studies that I might stop using the NASB as my primary text. I might switch over to the ESV or the LEB simply because I don't think it's translating some of these words appropriately and consistently, because ketz is consistently translated as end. It's not goal. So, all right. So that kind of the end of some time period. But this is related to this appointed time to do these things. Now, specifically in Daniel, let's look at Daniel 9:26. And then after 62 weeks, Messiah will be cut off and have nothing. The people of the prince, that's Nagid, not Sar, people of the prince will come destroy the city and the sanctuary, and its end, its ketz, will come with a flood. Even till the ketz, there will be war. So it will come with the end. Even till the end, there will be war. Desolations are determined. So this is the end of a time period. Daniel 11:27. And I think this one is really instructive. Look, as for both kings, their hearts will be intent on evil, and they will speak lies to each other at the same table. But it will not succeed, for the end is still to come at the appointed time. So the end is still, even when we're looking at Daniel 11 in context, the end was still to come. It's not there yet when they're doing this. And we see where it starts to switch. It starts to switch up in this in 30 and 31 into that time of the end. We see it in Daniel 11:45. This king that arose, this what I would say is the little horn, would pitch his tents in the royal pavilion between the seas and the beautiful land. This is the king that the king of the north and the king of the south are both coming against, but he still prevails. But yet he will come to his end, and no one will help him. So he's going to come to his ketz, his end of his time, and the end period of that time period. Daniel 12:6, or end of a time, whether it's end of 40 years, end of your life. Daniel 12:6. And he said, and one said to the man dressed in linen, who was above the rivers of the water, how long will it be till the ketz, to the end of these wonders? So how long will it be? And this is really, we looked at this when we looked at Daniel 11 and 12. How long will it be till the end? Isn't that what they're asking also? How long will it be till the about the sanctuary, the desecration, the transgression that's happening of desolation, and the Tamid being removed? And he tells them 2,300 days. And then the holy place will be restored, or the sanctuary. He's asking how long till the end of these wonders. And the one that was standing above the water raised his right hand and his left towards heaven. And he said, for a time, times, and half a time. Okay, so again, this idea of end, we want to know when is it going to end. And then lastly, in Daniel 12:13, But go your own way till the end. Then you will enter your rest, and again you will be allotted portion at the Ketz, the end of the age, and that is not um, uh, time period. That is a different word than time, which is also really interesting because we see some very similar type of language that leads us into the New Testament. Look, you will go into your rest and you will rise again for your allotted portion at the end of the age. And that brings us into Matthew 24:14. In the New Testament, we get this word end, but we get a different word. We get this word telos. Okay, this is the Greek word for end. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. Telos, it's used 40 times in the New Testament, but it simply means end. You can see I didn't put a lot there, but I want you to be able to see the word. Um, some people are more visual learners than just listening. And it says, this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all the nations, and then the end will come. Then the telos will come. So when the word end is used in the New Testament, it's almost always the word telos. Now we also see that in Matthew 24:6. And this parallels some of the other things that we see in Daniel, where it tells them, look, you'll be hearing of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not frightened, for these things must take place, but that is not yet the end. So remember how we talked about if Iran and Iraq attack Turkey, these are wars and rumors of wars, but it's not yet the end. And if we go back into our slides and we look at that kind of end time slides that we've been putting together, we learned that the end of sacrifice and really the abomination, that transgression that causes desolation, that's when we know we're really there. That's when we know. So these wars and these rumors of wars, we just need to be praying. We need to be praying for everyone involved. We need to be praying for the salvation of the people of Israel, the people of Iran, the people of America, the people of Britain, the people of Australia, New Zealand, Samoa. It doesn't matter. We need to be praying for people to trust and turn from their rebellious ways, from their pesa, their transgression, their rebellious sins. But look, it's not yet the end. Let's look at a couple others. Luke 21:9. And we looked at these way long time ago. In the first episode, go back to the first episode. When you hear of wars and disturbances, do not be terrified, for these things must take place first, but the end does not follow immediately. The end, the telos. Matthew 10:22. You will be hated by all because of my name, but it is the one who endured to the end, to the telos, who will be saved. Can you endure to the end when it comes, when it's going to come about? Matthew 24:13. Similar language, but the one who endures to the end will be saved. 1 Corinthians 15:24. Then comes the end when he hands over the kingdom to God and Father, when he has abolished all rule, authority, and power. We looked at this when we looked at the millennial kingdom. So you can go back, and we also looked at it when we did the Adamic covenant, even the series even before that. Look, let me go back into 15:22. As in Adam all die, so in Christ all will be made alive. Remember, the resurrection will everybody resurrected. Christ, the first fruits, then in the order, those who are Christ will be resurrected. And then at the end, at the second resurrection, everyone. Because as in Adam all die, so in Christ all will be made alive. Christ's death and resurrection and his sacrifice was powerful enough to affect the resurrection for everybody. Everybody will be resurrected, but some will be resurrected to eternal life, and some will be resurrected to eternal separation from God. And why are people separated from God? They're separated because they're rebellious. They don't want to live in God's kingdom. They don't want to follow what God says. It's hard to follow what your parents tell you to do, what the God of the universe is telling you to do. It is a challenge, and that's why we need to be in repentance. All right. Look, oh, hey, verse 23. But each in his own order, Christ the first fruits. After that, those who are Christ at his coming. Then comes the end. Then comes the end. So Christ's coming, and then comes the end. There's some different ends that we're talking about. There's multiple ends. Just like there was an end of 40 days, there's an end of 7 years. There's different end periods that we're talking about. Some are going to be resurrected and made alive at Christ's coming. Then comes the end, that when he hands over. So there's an end of the age, there's an end, resurrection happens. And we see that in the book of Revelation. So, all right. So that's this idea of end that we're doing. And we're going to get more into the time of the end when we hook into Revelation. We haven't hooked into Revelation yet. I'm hinting at it, but we have not found a clear spot that we can hook into it. Okay, so end. All right. So the next one is, we looked at Daniel 8:17. We looked at this time of the end phrase at Ketz. This vision, Daniel 8, pertains to the time of the end. So we have this external evidence that suggests that it's linked to the abomination of desolation, that it's linked to the end of sacrifice, that tells us that it's yet still future. And the vision, Gabriel was telling us it pertains to the time of the end. Now, while he was talking with me, I sank into a deep sleep, my face to the ground. He touched me and made me stand upright. Then he said, Behold, I'm going to let you know what will occur at the final period of indignation, for it pertains to the appointed time of the end. So we get another phrase here, time of the end. But as we saw when we looked at Habakkuk 2:3, there's also this word appointed here. This tells us that this might be a different word, and it actually is. So this is really interesting. Also, we get this idea of final period of indignation. So look, I'm letting you know what will occur at the final period of indignation. That's what the real thrust of this is. This indignation, when the little horn rises up and the little horn does something, he wants to let us know what's going to really happen at that time. That's the really important time period. And because we can tell that because when we come down here, we get one verse that talks about who the ram is. We get one verse that talks about who the goat is, but then it talks all these verses, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26. It's talking all about the little horn. The main part of the interpretation is talking about the little horn because that's what he really wants us to understand. Okay, but let's go back to verse 19. Look, it pertains to the appointed time of the end. Now, this phrase is not et Ketz. This is not the generic word for time, et. This is a different word. This is moed. So this is moed. A moed, it means appointed time. So this word is used 223 times in the ESV. Moed is a time of meeting, mostly used in regards to God. So we're going to see that it's used in regards to tent of meeting 140 times. That's the primary time that this word moed is used. But it's also used 51 times that it's translated either appointed time or time, translated 6 times as festival, seasons 3, feast, assembly, and it's used as a unit of time in Daniel 12:7. Remember when we looked at Daniel 12:7 and it says, how long till the end, the Ketz of these wonders? And he lifted his right hand, left hand towards heaven, and he swore it'll be for a time, times, and a half. That's actually moed, moedim, and a half. It's actually not the word, it's not the generic word, it's actually moed, and it actually has huge implications when we look at our timeline. But here we're going to look at it, the overall time We need to understand what moed means. This is the time we're going to take a moment to look at this word moed because it's used here in Daniel and it's used for a purpose. So it's used as season generically. Remember, it's used translated 3 times as season. We're just going to take a quick look at some of those. Genesis, what did I click on? Yeah, Genesis 1:14. Then God said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens, and separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years." This word seasons is moed, appointed times. Let it be for appointed times, times that God is going to meet with his people. Let it be for that. But also let it be for days and years. Psalm 104:19. And stop jumping over there. There we go. Psalm 104:19. He made the moon for the moed and the moon for the seasons, moon for the moed. The sun knows its place of its setting. So again, just seasons. All right. Now, we're going to look at this tent of meeting idea. Look, Genesis 17:21. But my covenant I will establish with Isaac, whom Sarah will bear with you at this season next year. This moed, this appointed time. So he's going to have Sarah come at this appointed time next year. Then, is anything too difficult for the Lord? At the appointed time, I will return to you. At this time next year. So, again, another reason I got frustrated with the NASB. Last time it translated season. This time it translated as an appointed time. But God was saying, I'm going to come back at an appointed time, an established time. Next year, Sarah will have a son. So he's meeting with his people. So Abraham conceived and bore a son to, so Sarah conceived and bore a son to Abraham in his old age at the appointed time of which God had spoken to him. All right. So at the appointed time, God told him what that time would be. God knows the times and the seasons, and he appoints those times. This is a very important concept that we understand. This moed, God has appointed times and seasons. All right. Exodus 27:21. In the tent of meeting, in the tent of moed, okay, outside the veil, which is before the ceremony. So the tent of meeting is outside the veil. Again, also very important. The tent of meeting is outside the veil, which is before the testimony. Aaron and his son shall keep it in order from evening to morning before the Lord. It shall be a perpetual statute throughout their generations for the sons of Israel. This has important implications for the future when we're looking at how these prophecies are going to play out. Met with his people in this tent of meeting, in this place. These were appointed time that God would meet. In the tent of the appointed time, you could say, which is outside the veil, which is outside of the Holy of Holies, which is before the testimony. Genesis 18:14. Is there anything too difficult for the Lord? At the appointed time, I will. Oh, I must have put that one in twice. Yeah, I clicked on the wrong thing. How about we do Exodus 40? There we go. Exodus 40. All right. Now, this is the tabernacle. Okay. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, on the first day of the first month, you shall set up the tabernacle of the tent of meeting. Okay. The tabernacle of the tent of moed. You shall place the ark of the testimony there, and you shall screen the ark with the veil. So the ark gets screened behind that veil. The ark is in the Holy of Holies, and then he's going to set up the tent of meeting. So the meeting place is around the outside and separated by the veil. You shall bring in the table and arrange what belongs on it, and you shall bring in the lampstand and mount its lamps. Moreover, you shall set the gold altar of incense before the ark of testimony, and set up the veil for the doorway to the tabernacle. Okay, so there's a tabernacle on the inside that is the part of the tent of meeting. And there's a veil between the tabernacle and the tent of meeting on the outside. And inside there's going to be the ark. There's going to be the lamps. There's going to be the things that belong in it, the altar of incense before the Ark of the Testimony. All right. Now, verse 6. Uh, you shall set the altar of burnt offering in front of the doorway of the tabernacle of the tent of Moed. So whenever you see tent of meeting, you should start reading tent of Moed, tent of an appointed time. God is arranging for when he's going to meet with his people. The tent of appointed time, the tent of meeting. So we're going to set this altar of burnt offerings in front of the doorway of the tabernacle. So the tabernacle is that inside part. And there's going to be an altar of burnt offerings on the outside. There's going to be an altar of incense on the inside, altar of prayer. Now, if we keep going through Exodus 40, and I would encourage you to read the whole Exodus 40. It's very instructive, and try to get a really good visual picture of what is going on with this place of meeting, this tent of meeting that we're meeting before God. You shall set the laver between the tent of meeting and the altar and put water in it. Okay, so this is again, I would just read through the whole thing. We're not going to spend too much time here, but I want people to understand, when you see tent of meeting 140 times, it's tent of Moed. It's tent of the appointed place. Now we also see this in Leviticus 23:2. Lord God again spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the sons of Israel and say to them, the Lord's appointed times. Okay, so the Lord's Moed. Okay, so in Exodus 40, we're seeing the tent of meeting is Moed, tent of Moed, tent of appointed times. But here it translated, and pretty much all the Bibles translated in Exodus 40 as tent of meeting. It's consistently translated as tent of meeting, but it's the same word, Moed. The Lord's appointed times, which you shall proclaim as holy convocations. My appointed times are these. So his Moed, God is telling us, these are the appointed times when I want to meet with my people. Okay? Then he goes through and he says, for 6 days work may be done, but on the seventh day there's a Sabbath of complete rest, a holy convocation. You shall not do a work. It is a Sabbath to the Lord in all your dwellings. The Sabbath day is a Moed. The Sabbath day is actually a day that you're supposed to meet with God. It's a day of rest. It's a day of meeting. Okay. Verse 4. These are the appointed times. These are the Moed of the Lord. Holy convocations which you shall proclaim at the times appointed for them. On the first month, on the 14th day, is the Lord's Passover. So the Passover is a Moed. On the 15th day, the Feast of Unleavened Bread. For 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. So it talks about this, the Feast of Unleavened Bread. It goes down to them, and it goes through all the feasts. It goes through all the feasts that we're going down here. You shall count days to the day after the seventh Sabbath. Then you shall present to the Lord a new grain offering. So we're going through into Pentecost. This is going to be the first fruits of when, just like when we saw with Jesus' resurrection. Okay. So if you read through all of Leviticus 23, you're going to see all the appointed times, all the Moeds that we're going through. And you can see that the Day of Atonement, so we get down here, just before that is the blowing of trumpets. So Yom Teruah, if we go back up here, day of the seventh month is the Day of Atonement. So these are all related to the appointed time in the Moed. We'll come down here, and we're going to see that there's going to be the Feast of Booths. The 15th of the seventh month is the Feast of Booths. For 7 days, this is the Holy Convocation. And how do we know all these things? Because these are the appointed times of the Lord, which you shall proclaim as holy convocations. So that ends, and you come down all through here. These are so Moses declared the sons of Israel the appointed time, the moed of the Lord. All of Leviticus 23 is talking about the moed that's related to meeting with God. So these are actually really important, this idea of appointed times and moed. So when God talks about moed and he's talking about appointed times, he relates it to the tent of meeting. He relates it to setting up of that tabernacle. And then he relates it to the feast, the Sabbath, the feast of Passover, unleavened bread, feast of Yom Teruah, the atonement, feast of booths, the 50 days. So all of these times are related to these appointed time when God is going to meet with his people. Why is that important? That's important because it plays in a huge role when we're looking at God's return. When God came the first time, we know that Passover, unleavened bread, first fruits were fulfilled in what Jesus did by him dying and being resurrected and being the first fruit. And then we know that Pentecost was partially fulfilled with the giving of the Holy Spirit. And we're going to talk about how these moed, the fall feasts, we know have not been fulfilled, but yet there's still something going on with the spring feast. And we're going to look at this when we go into this next step, times and half. We're going to talk about this in even more depth. But I want people to get an idea of what's going on. All right. Now, real quick, I wanted to point this out. This is in First Chronicles 23:31. And to offer, let me go up one verse so I get to the phrase. So they are to stand every morning to thank and to praise the Lord, and likewise at evening. Okay, so we get this evenings and mornings. Morning and evenings, you're to offer praise and thanksgiving, and to offer all the burnt offerings to the new moons and the fixed number set out by the ordinance concerning them. Where did new moons come? Where did that come from? If you go back and you look at the Old Testament, and if somebody can find this, please point this out to me, because I can't find where God ever appointed the new moons to be Moed. Now I see where Yom Teruah, which is the seventh day, the first day of the seventh month, is one of the appointed times, and it's at the new moon. But I don't think this is supposed to be every new moon. Um, so just something very interesting, and you see something very similar in Second Chronicles 8:13, and they did so according to the daily rule, offering them up according to the commandment of Moses for the Sabbaths, the new moons, and the 3 annual feasts: Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Feast of Weeks, and the Feast of Booths. Okay, so these are the 3 annual feasts. What about atonement? What about Passover? Uh, so starting to get some things that were maybe losing some things. Again, I'm not going to make a lot of it. Just kind of wanted to point that out um, in regards to what we were dealing with. All right. Let us take a look. Now, this could also be in place of why God says this: I hate your new moon and your appointed feasts. They have become a burden to me. I am weary of bearing them. So if you go back through and you read all of Isaiah 1, look, bring your worthless offerings no longer. Incense is an abomination to me. New moon and Sabbath, the calling of the assemblies, I cannot endure iniquity in the solemn assembly. I hate them. Why is that? What is going on? We need to be very careful in how we celebrate God's appointed times and his feasts. Um, what is it he wants us to do? As New Testament Christians, do we need to keep the feasts? Do we need to not keep the feasts? What happens if we celebrate them? Um, we could do a whole video on this. I'm not going to go through it. I just wanted to point out some of the issues when I looked up Moed. These are all related to Moed, right? So this is appointed feast. This word appointed feast is Moed. So when I'm reading through and I'm looking for all these Moed, and when I do a research thing, I looked at all 223 of the verses where Moed was mentioned. Looked at all 223, and then I put in the ones I thought were appropriate for the study that we're doing, to try to get people to get a context of it. So obviously there's a much larger teaching that could go on here, and we could go off into a lot of branches, but I'm trying to stay on focus. All right, so let's get to the next one. We see something very similar in Lamentations 2:6, where it says, and he has violently treated his tabernacle like a garden booth. He has destroyed his appointed meeting place. The Lord has caused to be forgotten the appointed feast and the Sabbath in Zion. He's caused it to be forgotten. He has despised king and priest in the indignation of his anger. It's just talking about when Israel was, this is Jeremiah who wrote Lamentations, and he's talking about how the land of Israel is going to be destroyed when Babylon comes and takes over. Jeremiah's been preaching this, and he's lamenting these things. Okay. Moed, Exodus 9:5. And the Lord set a definite time, saying, tomorrow the Lord will do these things in the land. Yahovah will do this thing in the land in a definite time. He set a Moed. He set an appointed time. So the Jehovah did these things on the next day, and all the livestock of Egypt died. God sets an appointed time and says, tomorrow I'm going to do these things. God knows his appointed time and his feasts. We see it in Psalm 75:2. When I select an appointed time, it is I who judge with equity. So when God sets his appointed time, the earth and all who dwell in it melt. It is I who have firmly set its pillars. It's telling us he sets these times. Psalm 102:13. You will arise and have compassion on Zion, for it is time to be gracious to her, for the appointed time has come. Be gracious unto Zion, compassionate to her, the appointed time has come. Zephaniah 3:18, last one, and then we will start to move on. I will gather those who grieve about the appointed feasts. They come from you, O Zion. The reproach of exile is a burden on them. Okay, so Zephaniah actually has a lot to say about the end times. And when we get more into Revelation, we will actually talk more about Zephaniah. Zephaniah is pretty good. Obadiah, Zephaniah, Joel, so good. Okay. I just wanted to show you, see how these word Moed is being used. So everything has a Moed. Everything has an appointed time. Now let's look at the few times that it's used in Daniel before we move to the next section. So Daniel 11:27. As for both kings, their hearts will be intent on evil. We've seen this before. They'll speak lies to each other at the same table, but will not succeed. For it is an ed, it is a ketz. For the ketz is still to come at the Moed. So the ketz is still coming at the Moed. 29. At the Moed, he will return and come into the south, but this time will not turn out like the way it did before. At the appointed time. Okay. So this is really interesting. What this means, is this the switch? Is this from where this starts, the future, or the appointed times, or the times of the end? Remember, we're trying to build a timeline. I'm not going to look at the specific events unless it relates to understanding when this timeline applies and how we can apply it. And that's what I'm doing. What I'm trying to prove is that Daniel 8 applies to the time of the end. And I'm trying to show that internally through evidence. So some of those who have insight will fall in order to refine, purge, and make them pure until the end time, till the et ketz, because it's still to come at the Moed, at the appointed time. We saw Daniel 8:19, right? That's where we're at right now. And we saw Daniel 12:7. I heard the man dressed in linen. Remember, he raised his right hand, his left hand, and he said that it would be for a time, times, and half a time. So this is Moed, Moedim, and half. There's actually time is not here. It's just half. So how long until the end of these things? So this is our idea of moed as related to the end times. Now, what does this all mean? Yahovah has appointed times. He has moed. And if I put these all together, you can see in purple, these are where moed is mentioned in Daniel 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. So we have 3 times that moed is mentioned, these times of the end, and how it's related to the end, the ketz. Okay, and they seem to be, and you see in Daniel 11:35, how these are actually mentioned in the same verse, so that they may be refined, purified, and made white until the time of the end, for it still waits the appointed time. Okay, so Daniel 8 is really trying to suggest to us, I think, that it applies to the end times internally, the internal evidence, and how it applies to Matthew 24 and Daniel 11. All right. Let us see. Okay. So what I think is that the end times is not just historical to Antiochus. I think Daniel 8 does not apply to that. It's also why these prophecies don't apply to Daniel to 70 AD, because in 70 AD we don't get that same idea of, you get the destruction of the temple, but you don't get this abomination being set up. You can say the destruction is an abomination, but you're not seeing the same picture where you get the sacrifice removed and you get an abomination where something else is set up in its place. So I think these are still referring to this end time. Um, it's 137. How much do I have left to go? Yeah, I might come back to that. We'll see if I have time. All right. So the question is, does the time of the end apply to the whole vision or only to the little horn? Does this, Daniel 8, does it apply to the whole vision or only the little horn? Will these things happen? Will there be an Iran Turkey war, or is it only one or the other? Um, all right, let us take a look here. Trying to decide whether I want to cover this because I really don't think it matters. If we happen to see Iraq attack Turkey, we can say, yeah, we may be dealing with it. If we don't, I don't think it matters. I think we're still looking for the same thing. What it relates to is this term. I do want to cover this, though. I do want to cover this word latter end. So we're going to cover a little bit of this. Okay. I want us to look at this term because this is actually really important for our studies going forward. Daniel 8:19 and Daniel 8:23 have this term latter end. It actually is actually this word akarit. And you see it actually 4 times in Daniel 8, 10, 11, and 12. You can see I put it in blue to highlight it. So I do want to cover this. This word latter end is actually just one word. It's just akarit. So how does that work? This word akalit means ladder or end, or sometimes we will put it as latter end, and it's used 61 times in the Old Testament. What is the thing that God is bringing to an end? Well, 25 times it's translated as end, 14 times as ladder, and when it's translated as ladder, it's almost always combined with days or years. Okay. For I have come to give you an understanding in Daniel 10:14 of what will happen to your people in the latter days, for this vision pertains to the days in yet future. Right. So let's take a look at this word akarith. And I think the most famous verse for this is Isaiah 46:10. where he tells God saying to Isaiah, look, I declare the end from the beginning. This word end here is not ketz. This word is akalith. This has something to do different than this word ketz. So God is telling us that he declares this end, this akalith from the beginning, and from ancient times the things which have not been done, saying, my purpose will be established and I will accomplish all my good pleasure. Look, remember the things for I am God. There's no one. I am God and there's no one like me. He's telling people who he is and what he's doing. We see something. Look, the prophets swear falsely, the prophets prophesy falsely, and the priests rule on their own authority. My people love it so. But what will you do at the akalith, the end of it? Okay, what are you going to do at that time? And this is where we kind of get in this with Revelation. I want to point this out in Revelation 22:13, where Jesus says, I am the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end. This word, this beginning and the end, gives us this idea of akalith. Now, the word is translated as telos in the New Testament. It's end. And we have two words in the Old Testament. We've seen ketz and we see akalith. But this idea of combining this beginning and end is a phraseology that we don't see combined with ketz. We can see that combined with akalith. Let's take a look at Isaiah 41:4. Who has performed and accomplished it, calling forth from generations from the beginning. Okay, so we get this idea of beginning. I am Yahovah. I am the first and with the last. I am he. The coastlands have seen and are afraid. The ends of the earth tremble. The cats, the ends of the earth tremble, and they've drawn near. Each one helps his neighbor, saying, be strong. The craftsman encourages the smelter, and who smooths metal with the hammer encourages him who beats the anvil, saying of the soldier, it is good, and he fastens it with nails, so that it will not totter. But you, Israel, my servant, whom I have Jacob, whom I have chosen, descendant of Abraham, my friend, you whom I have taken from the ends of the earth and called you from its remotest parts, and said to you, you are my servant. Look, do not fear, I am with you. Do not anxiously look about you, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and I will help you. He's telling him what he can do. He's the beginning. He's the one that protects them. Then we see in 48:12, listen to me, Jacob, even Israel, whom I have called. I am he. I am the first, and I'm also the last. Surely my hand has founded the earth. My right hand has spread out the heavens. God, we're seeing this picture again of Jesus saying who he is. He's the first and the last. He's the beginning and the end. Thus says Yahovah, the King of Israel, and his Redeemer, the Lord of hosts, the commander of the host, the prince of the host, Yahovah of hosts. I am the first and I am the last. There is no God beside me. Who is like me? Let him proclaim and declare it. Let him recount it to me in order. From the time I established the ancient nation, they declare these things. Who can do these things? I am the beginning and the end. There is no other rock. I know of none. So this idea of beginning and end. So then we go into this idea of latter days. So let's take a look at how latter. So that's this idea of end, beginning and end. I just wanted to bring that up. Deuteronomy 4:30. When you are distressed and all these things have come upon you in the latter days, you will return to the Lord your God and listen to his voice. This one here is Akarlith Yom. So this actually has days attached to it. In the latter days, in the latter Yom. Jeremiah 30:24. The fierce anger of the Lord will not turn back until he's performed and accomplished. In the latter days, you will understand this. So again, latter akalith days, it combines it. So sometimes it's combined latter end, but sometimes it actually combines it with days. Why is this important? These words, there are multiple ones here, and they're talking about prophecy. When you see this one here, these 14 times, when we see latter and akalith combined, it's this prophecy that's talking about in the latter days. Um, so let's take a look at Isaiah 2. Now it will come about in the last days, the mountain of the house of the Lord will be established as the chief of the mountain. In the latter days, in the last days. This is again, once more, a prophecy about the millennial kingdom. And we can go through all 14 of these references. Isaiah 41:22. Let them bring forth and declare what's going to take place. As for former events, declare what they were, that we may consider them and know their outcome, or announce to us what is coming. What is going to take place? What are these events? Um, Hosea 3:5. And they will come to afterwards the son of Israel will return and seek the Lord their God, David their king, and they will come trembling to the Lord and his goodness in the last days. Again, this akalith idea. So then we look at where we get it in Daniel. So Daniel 10:14. Now I have come to give you an understanding of what will happen to your people in the latter days, for the vision pertains to the days yet to come, or days future. That future is not actually there. So this latter days idea and concept. And so if we look at what we have going on with these Daniel, we see for these latter days, in the latter end, in the Akarith of their kingdom, at this end times, when these have reached a fulfillment, a king of bold face will arise. So I don't think that it really matters. We're looking for when the king arises. We're looking for the little horn arising. We're looking for those things. The war and the battle. I mean, Jesus could have mentioned all of those other things if he wanted to, but I think that's why he talked about wars and rumors of wars. That's why people have looked at throughout the millennia and said, "Oh, we're living in the end times." We have to wait till this little horn, till this king rises up. And so we have to look for what those signs look like. Um, so, all right. So again, what are we looking for? Are we looking for a king, or are we looking for a new war? Okay. Um, so if you want to look for the king approach, it took 163 years from the time of Alexander until the abomination of desolation from Antiochus. It's unlikely. I mean, if it happened again, where the Ram and Iran and Iraq attack, it's just going to take a long time. I keep reiterating the same thing, and I think there's a reason why Jesus focuses on the abomination of desolation. These all tie into that. I think the king, the little horn of Daniel 8, is probably the king of Daniel 9 and 11 that arises. And so I think what we're really looking for is this little horn, this king. Um, but we got to keep our eyes open for the rest of the possibility that there's another war. But I think we're just going to be getting too sidetracked. Um, so look, Daniel 8:19, it says, "Look, I will make known to you what shall be in the latter end, the Akarith of the indignation." The indignation has to do with what the king is doing, what he's rising up to do, ending sacrifices, creating the abomination, being rebellious, This is what the prophecies are really trying to get us to understand. And this refers to the moed of the kes, the appointed time of the end. This is what, when we are looking at, this is the verse that kind of combines all of these things together, that what we're really looking for. So if we were to put that onto a map or a current timeline, with Jesus in Matthew 24, we get the abomination. And he tells us to go back into Daniel. And when we look at Daniel, we find that the sacrifice is taken away. We find that there's going to be this 1,290 days between these two time periods. Daniel 9 tells us there's going to be this covenant that comes in through here. And Daniel 8 says maybe that there's war, that maybe there's this war out before the covenant that leads up to this little horn arising at this future point that then does all of this stuff. But what we're really looking for is we're looking for this little horn that's going to arise. That's what we're really looking for. Because if we go back and look at Daniel 11, it says, but the appointed time is yet to come, right? If we go back and look at it, it says it's still waiting for the appointed time. It's still coming. It still waits the appointed time, because we're really waiting for the appointed time of the end, when it really finally ends. All right. So that brings us to this final thing where people want to know, what is the 2300 evenings and mornings? What is this really? Is it days or is it years? If we go back and look here, where does this 2300 days, does it involve somewhere up in here, or is this years? When does this 2300 evenings and mornings start, and when does it end? Well, I think the simple thing is, if we go back and we read it, we read 9:14, we get an idea simply by the question. We're going to be in 9, 12, and 13. Look, and on account of transgression, the host will be given over to the horn. We put that in there, along with the regular sacrifice, and it will fling truth to the ground and perform its will and prosper. Then I heard a Holy One speaking, and he asked this question: how long will the vision about the tamid, the regular sacrifice, while the transgression that causes desolation, which I would say is the abomination of desolation, so as to allow both the holy place and the host to be trampled? So those are the four events that we get, and then he tells us 2300 mornings and evenings and mornings. So if we were to look at when it ends, it would look like it's going to end then when the holy place is restored. So we know the end is when the holy place is restored. I think that's pretty straightforward and clear. What does that mean? Well, that's going to be more study, but we at least know that that's when it ends. So the question is then, when does it start? When does this whole 2300? And is it years or is it days? Well, we already have a time frame of what he tells us: evenings and mornings. So let's take a look at how the Bible uses this term evenings. And I'm not going to go through a big word study on this word evenings. I just want to look at it a couple times. Genesis 1:5. God called the light day, and darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning one day. This evening, same word. Evening and morning, it's combined one day. Goes down here again in verse 8. And there was evening and there was morning a second day. So evening and morning combined together talks about a day, really suggests this literal day idea. Exodus 12:18. On the first month, on the 14th day of the month, at evening, so a specific day, at evening, you shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the month at evening. So evening used twice. They're telling you it's a specific time of the day at evening. When we went and looked at Daniel's prayers, he was at evening. He was praying at the evening sacrifice, time of the evening sacrifice. Somebody came to him. We see it in Exodus 16:6 and 8. So Moses and Aaron said to all the sons of Israel, at evening, You will know that the Yahovah has brought you out of the land of Egypt. So you will know. Look, this will happen when Yahovah gives you meat to eat in the evening and bread to the full in the morning. At evening, a specific time of the day. We see that again down here in 13. So it came about at evening that the quails came up. Okay. Leviticus 23:32. It is to be a Sabbath of complete rest to you. You shall humble your souls on the 9th of the month at evening. From evening until evening, you shall keep your Sabbath. Evening until evening, you shall keep your Sabbath. Ezekiel 24:18. So I spoke to the people in the morning, and in the evening my wife died. And in the morning I did as I was commanded. Sad verse, but again, time of the day. Now, I went through the whole scripture, 134 uses. There's not a single time that evening and year is used in the same verse, right? When we looked at day, we looked at this verse here. For the Lord has a day of vengeance, a year of recompense for the cause of Zion. We get this idea that this day for a year motif. We saw it in Isaiah 61:2, to proclaim the favorable year of the Lord, the day of vengeance of our God. We saw it in Isaiah 63:4. For the day of vengeance was in my heart, and the year of redemption has come. But when we look at evening, not a single time is evening and year used in the same verse together. Day and year is used 139 times together. I love this. I love logo software. I just typed in day and evening, day and year, and boom, all those. Then I typed in evening and year. Nothing. Now, I did try to do something similar. There's a different word. I typed in night and year, and there's 2 times that night and year is used together. For 1,000 years in your sight are like yesterday when it passes by, or as a watch in the night. Okay. So, watch in the night. So, night is used here with year, but it's not the same word. It is not the word for evening. And it is like, right? So it is used in reference to like a watch in the night, like he's doing something watching in the night. But evening, when it's used, is used at a specific time of day. It's also used in Genesis 1:14, which is really interesting. Then God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons, for moed, and for days and years. So there's lights in the expanse of the heaven that separate the day from the night. So we know the sun and the moon, there's lights in the sky that separate the day from the night. It doesn't separate the evening, it separates the day from the night. And let them be for signs, moed, days, and years. So it's telling us those are the only 2 times that night and year are in the same verses, but evening never is. How about morning? Now, morning has been used 212 times. Evening was used 134 times in the Old Testament. Morning is used 212 times. I'm just going to give you a couple of those. Exodus 12:10, and you shall not leave any of it over until morning, but whatever is left of it until morning, you shall burn with fire. Okay, so that's the manna that they were getting. 12:18. In the first of the month, on the 14th day of the month, at evening, you shall eat your unleavened bread until the 21st day of the month at evening. Didn't I do 12:18? Yeah, I don't know why. Must have been for evening. I had it for morning. Oh, well. We have enough other ones. Let's do Exodus 34:2. So be ready by morning and come up to the mount, up in the morning to Mount Sinai, and present yourself there to me on the top of the mountain. So it's a particular time of day. It's a particular time when you're supposed to go do something, versus night when it's just the entire expanse of the night. 1,000 years is like the expanse of a night, like a watchman who's watching throughout the night. Now, there's only one time, and so then morning is used very frequently in poetry. You see this one, Benjamin is a ravenous wolf. In the morning, he devours his prey, and in the evening, he divides his spoil. Hosea 6:4. What shall I do with you, O Ephraim? What shall I do with you, O Judah? For your loyalty is like a morning cloud and like dew which goes away early. Psalm 5:3. In the morning, O Lord, you will hear my voice. In the morning, I will order my prayer to you and eagerly watch. Psalm 35. For his anger is but for a moment, his favor is for a lifetime. Weeping may last for the night, but a shout of joy comes in the morning. Again, this morning, this renewal idea, poetry. So it's used very frequently. Morning is used very frequently in poetry. So out of the 212 uses of morning, there's one time that it's used in combination with year. And it's in a prophetic passage. So let's take a look in Ezekiel 46:13. And you shall provide a lamb a year old without blemish for a burnt offering to the Lord, to Yahovah daily. Morning by morning you shall provide it. Okay. So every morning they're to provide a burnt offering and a lamb. And if you look at Ezekiel 46 and you look at my teaching on the millennial kingdom, this is related to that, I think, the millennial temple that's going to occur then. So there's going to be a lamb, a year old, for burnt offering to the Lord, to Yehovah daily. Morning by morning you shall provide it, which kind of mirrors the evening and morning offerings that we've been talking about. So this is the time that year is, and the year old is the lamb. It has nothing to do. So I think that really suggests that we're not dealing with years for this 2300 morning and evening. Now, how about Daniel? Daniel uses year frequently. Let's see how Daniel uses it. He uses it in Daniel 8:1. In the third year of the reign of Belshazzar, king of the vision, the vision appeared to me. That's how Daniel uses year. Daniel uses year as in an actual year. He doesn't use it in the prophetic sense here. And everywhere in Daniel that he uses it in the third year of the reign, in the first year of the reign. How about prophecy uses of evening and morning? So then I went and looked at evening and morning together and looked at them in any type of thing where it could be something prophetic. Okay, so we find a couple of them. Let's start with Isaiah 17:14. At the evening time, behold, there is terror. Before morning, they are no more. Such will be the portion of those who plunder us and the lot who pillage us. And if we go through and we look at that, it talks about nations will rumble on like the rumblings of many waters. He will rebuke them and they will flee far away, and he will chasten the nations. And at evening time, behold, there is terror, and before the morning there are no more. This is really going to be an interesting. We're going to look at this one a little bit more when we look at Joel and when we look at the day of the Lord. We're going to look at this passage a little bit more. But it doesn't relate evenings and mornings to anything that suggests a year. Let's look at Zechariah 3:3. I must have put something in wrong. I'll have to go see if I can find it. Was it no 3:3? All right. Well, let's do Zechariah 14:7. For it will be a unique day, which is known to the Yahovah, neither day nor night, but it will come about that at evening time there will be light. So again, not really used in reference to a year, but it is a prophetic passage. And this also relates to Day of the Lord language and Joel. So we're going to look at that also there. So we get evening and morning related to that language. How about, so those are the only ones. I'll have to go back and look at the Zechariah 3. That bothers me that I put it down incorrectly. I'm going to look at Revelation 4:8. And the four living creatures, each one of them had 6 wings full of eyes all around, and day and night they do not cease to say, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty. So day and night, again, reference in New Testament relates to praise of God by the holy angels. 7:15, for this reason they are before the throne of God, and they serve him day and night in the temple. He who sits on the throne will spread his tabernacle over them. So this is in relationship to this group of people that are worshiping before him, people that are coming out of the Great Tribulation, the elders. They're talking about all these groups of people. But they're serving him day and night in his temple. Again, now I reference to years. Revelation 12:10. Revelation 12:10. Then I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, now the salvation and power and kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come, for the accuser of our brethren has been thrown down, he who accuses them before our God day and night. So this was the accuser has been thrown down, but he accused them day and night. 14:11. And the smoke of their torment goes up forever and ever. They have no rest day and night, those who worship the beast in his image and who receives a mark of his name. Again, not related to year. And then last one, 2010. And the devil who deceived them was thrown into the lake of fire, where the beast and the false prophet also are, and they will be tormented day and night forever and ever. So once again, we see that day and night, morning and evening, it's not referred to years. There's no connection to years. And I encourage you, go do your own search. But unfortunately, I think what the Seventh-day Adventists teach, and some of the people that teach the 2300 evenings and mornings are years. You're putting it into the text. I don't think you can pull that out of the text. I think a lot of the things, it's already challenging enough without us trying to put something into the text. So I think that we have to say that it's not years, that it is, with all these uses that are going on, that this is days. And these morning and evenings always seem to refer to literal days, even when it's used in poetry. It's consistently used as a day, or reference, like when joy comes in the morning or things along those lines. The majority, though, of the word is used in the historical books, and it rarely is mornings and evenings, those specific words used in prophecy. And even when it is, you still kind of get this idea of literal days. And then I also think that you can't say that this is, so some people want to say, well, since it's evenings and mornings, maybe this is actually 1150 days. I've heard that as well. Let me show you a couple of things why I don't think that that's the case either. Let's look at First Chronicles 16:40. Okay, so Zadok the priest and his relatives, the priest before the tabernacle of the Lord in the high place which was at Gibeon, to offer burnt offerings to the Lord on the altar of burnt offerings continually, morning and evening, even according to all that is written in the law of the Lord, which he commanded them. Morning and evening means that the burnt offerings were being given continually, or in the evenings, in the morning. They were continually given in the evenings and the mornings. I don't think you're trying to split those up. They were actually given twice a day. Because this is relationship, it's a relationship to the sacrifices being taken away, right? The tamid is being taken away, and the tamid is supposed to be offered morning and evening. So it's supposed to be offered twice a day. And so it's 2300. Is it 2300 times that's taken away, or is it 2300 mornings and evenings? So I think what it's trying to say is it's 2300 literal days. 2 Chronicles 2:4. Behold, I am about to build a house for the name of the Lord, for the Yahovah my Elohim, dedicating it to him to burn fragrant incense before him and set out the showbread continually and offer burnt offerings morning and evening on Sabbaths, on new moons, and on the Moed of feasts to the Lord our God, being required forever in Israel. So if I said that I'm offering sacrifices for 100 days, mornings and evenings, you would understand that it's gonna be for 100 days. That it's not 50 days because I'm doing it twice a day. I'm only doing it for 50 days. So it's this idea of it's supposed to be offered twice a day. It doesn't mean that you cut it in half. One more, Ezra 3:3. So they set up on the altar on its foundation, for they were terrified because of the peoples of the land, and they offered burnt offerings on it to Jehovah, burnt offerings morning and evening. So again, just this idea that the burnt offerings were offered morning and evening. Daniel tells us when the angel came to him, it was at the time of the evening offering. So this is when it's supposed to occur. So what does that mean? I think the 2300 is literal days and not years. I think it's a stretch to say that these are years. You're basically just reading into the that you want it to be years, but the context doesn't tell us that that's the case. Okay, so what event is at the end of the 2300 days? It says, how long will the vision about the regular sacrifice applies while the transgression causes horror, so as to allow both the holy place and the host to be trampled? 2300 evenings and mornings, then the sanctuary will be restored to its rightful place. The sanctuary actually is the word Kodesh, which is the holy place. During this time, the host will be trampled. We have to decide what is the host. And we'll have to, so we're going to do is we're going to leave what is the restored holy place, just like we did for the blessing of the 1335 days. We're going to leave that for later. We're not going to try to figure it out. What we're trying to figure out is, when does the 2300 days apply? When does it start? When does it end? We have a pretty good idea of the end point. We just don't know what event that really means. And we'll have to figure that out. But we're trying to figure out, what is the 2300 days? When does it apply? And I think we're close to being done with that, which is the goal. So if we were to look at it, this is the structure I'm going to suggest. So here's our abomination of desolation. Here's the daily sacrifice, or the tamid. When that is taken away, I would say that begins the 2300 evenings and mornings, because this has to do with the sacrifice. The 2300 is related to the evenings and mornings, 2300 days that the sacrifice is taken away. So that's what my suggestion is. And at the end, there will be the Kodesh restored. The holy place will be restored. So that's what I'm going to suggest. So this is 2 hours and 13 minutes, so much longer than what I thought it was going to entail. I had some additional slides. I'm just going to kind of go through those kind of quick. I've already skipped some, and I'm going to skip some more. So if we look at the events of Daniel 8, 9 through 14, we see some of the hosts fall to earth, the hosts are trampled, and the hosts are given over. Some of the stars fall to earth, the stars are trampled. It's implied, it's not stated directly. The tamid is removed from the prince of the host, the Tsar, and the tamid is given over. So this is a single event, but the tamid is given over and is for 2300 days. The place of the sanctuary is thrown down. The Kodesh, the holy place, is trampled, and there's a transgression that makes desolate that happens. Okay. So there's this word that we were going to study a little bit more, but I'm not going to take the time. But there's a two-part question here. How long is the vision concerning the regular burnt offering and the transgression that makes desolate, and the giving over the sanctuary and the host to trampling? So the question is, how long? How long has the sacrifice occur? The removal of the sacrifice occur? How long is this transgression that makes desolate? And if we say that the transgression comes after the tamid, but the tamid's included in it, the removal of the sacrifice, that's going to be the beginning point. And during that time, the sanctuary is given over and the host is trampled. and we have to define who the host is. So those are things that we have to look at as well. So the question is, does the trampling of the Kodesh, the trampling of the holy place, the trampling of the sanctuary, does it occur before the tamid is removed and the abomination occurs? So does it occur here in this covenant time frame, or does the trampling occur after the tamid is removed? And I think, again, since the question is involving the sacrifice being removed, it's hard to say that the trampling occurs before the sacrifice is removed. What is the beginning point? What starts it? And I think the only thing that you can say that starts it is the removal of the sacrifice. There's a transgression that makes desolate. And if somebody wants to say that the transgression, the abomination, occurs at the exact same time as the daily sacrifice, which was something we considered when we looked at Daniel 11, that's fine, but it's still starting here. It's still starting at this point. So I think that needs to be the starting point. I don't think that we can make the starting point something else. There's nothing else to make it there other than the abomination. And if that was the case, then the sacrifice happened beforehand. It has to go back and include that. And if they happen at the same time, then it still starts here. It still starts at the sacrifice. So I think that's pretty clear. We're asking if there's an attachment to Revelation. We're still asking this question. Is there an attachment to Revelation? All right, so these are the two words that we're looking at in terms of sanctuary and holy. I'm not going to go through those. That's Mikdash and Kodesh, and how many times that they're used. The Kodesh is used so many times. I just want to mention the Kodesh. So many things are called holy. We have the holy temple, the holy sanctuary, the holy place, holy people, holy assembly, holy utensils, holy garments, holy things. We have a holy city. We have a holy Sabbath. We have a holy mountain. We have a holy throne. And we have a holy, holy, holy God Almighty. So all of those things are called Kodesh. They're all called holy. I had a whole bunch to look at that. But again, we're 2 hours and 20 minutes. I'm going to have to look at that later because I want to get to the 2300 days because that's what we're really talking about. Temple comparisons. This is just letting us know that there's a Kodesh, Kodashim, that inside the holy place where the Ark of the Covenant, right, when we look at this tabernacle here, the court of tabernacle, in this place right here was where the Ark of the Covenant, there was a veil that was separated, right? You can see there's a veil here that separates the Holy of Holies, the Kodesh, Kodashim, and the Kodesh is the holy. So all of this was made holy, but this was the Holy of Holies where God resided. And we were going to talk about that in more in depth, but I'm not going to. These are all the words that we need to understand. If we're going to understand Daniel 8, we really need to understand what's going on with host. We need to understand what's going on with prince, Holy of Holies. We need to understand all these different 8. I was going to hopefully help us understand this a little bit better because I want to get to this. Okay. Is there an attachment to Revelation yet? That's where we need to go. So there's some language that suggests that we may have an attachment to Revelation. So if we look at Daniel 8:10, and it, the little horn, grew up to the host of heaven and caused some of the host and some of the stars to fall to the earth, and it trampled them down. So the little horn threw down some of the stars and the host to the earth, and it trampled them down. This is the host of heaven and caused some of the host and some of the stars to fall to the earth. So where might we see this in Revelation? Well, there's 3 spots. Let's look at Revelation 12:4. And his tail, and if we go back up here, we understand that is the dragon, the great red dragon. And we, again, have to look at this in more depth to understand this connection. But his tail swept away 1/3 of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. Very, very similar language. Question is when does this happen? But I think we're looking at, we see a hook that may be getting us a hook into Revelation. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she gave birth, it might devour her child. Okay. Then we also see it in Revelation 12:9. And the dragon was thrown down, the serpent of old who is called the devil, Satan who deceives the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. Okay. So there is some angels that are thrown down with Satan. So in the first one, we get that they are swept away. Some of them, the dragon threw some angels to the earth. And now we get this idea that Satan himself is thrown down to the earth, and they were trodden down with him. Like, kind of sounds like that language that they were trampled down, right? So we go back to Daniel 10. The stars fall to the earth, and it trampled them down. So it's just a very similar language there. And his angels were thrown down with him, and he was thrown down to the earth. Then I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, now the salvation and power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come. For the accuser of our brethren has been thrown down. He accuses them before our God day and night. And we saw that when we looked at that day and night. So day and night, they were accused. They were thrown down. So what does that mean? That means that something may be going on within this time period of this 2300 evenings and mornings when this little horn arises, that suggests something happens either right here, or was this throwing down occurring out here? And so we're going to have to take a better look at that. But I think we're starting to get a hook into Revelation. I think it's the first time I can clearly say that there's something that seems very similar that we'd have to look at. But I think so far, this is the correct structure that we're dealing with. And we don't want to be careful to put too much into that structure. So the more complex structure, right? So here's the abomination right here. Here's that 7-year covenant. Here's the daily sacrifice, the Tamid being taken away. Here's our sign in the sun, moon, and stars. Something with the Son of Man returning. We have something with the gathering the elect. We have the Kodesh, the holy place, being restored. And maybe this is after this. I don't know. But if we look at terms of time, if we calculate this time, right? So if we take 1290 and we add 1335, we get a number of 2,625 days. 2,625, which is 325 days shorter than this blessing. So it's shorter than this blessing, which is why you see it here, which is why you see it on this side. However, when we do it here, this Kodesh might be on the other side. It might be after gathering this elect, but it's definitely still before the blessing. So that's why you see it this way. So this is more complex, has more. It combines Matthew 24, all of that Matthew 24, 15 through 29, 30 area. Whereas this is just our simple structure that helps us just with our overall timeline. And then we come down here and we added our 2300 evenings and mornings, and we add it down here. Oops. We add it down here, the host. Oh, why is that there? That's why. We added down there that the host was trampled down here on the bottom. So that's basically where we're at. I know that was a lot, and there's a lot more. Daniel 8, actually, I think, has a lot more than Daniel 9. I think Daniel 8 and 11 with Daniel 12 really need to be combined more, and combined with Matthew 24. which is why we get all of this here and why we get this up and through here. So we're trying to put these all together to understand what's going on or what's going to happen in the future. So, what's the takeaway from Daniel 8? I think the takeaway, number one, is that the 2300 days are literal days, that it starts at the taking away of the Tamid or the sacrifice and it ends with the Kodesh or the holy place being restored. That it's yet future. However, that future time, there could be something that applies to the whole vision. So there could be an Iran, Iraq type of attack on Turkey. And I just want to mention there's a video that I was watching with Joel Richardson and Nelson Waters and a couple of other people talking about just about Daniel 8. And I recommend those teachers. I think that they do a very good job. I watch all different teachers. I watch people from Seventh Day Adventists. I've watched teachers from everywhere. I've looked at all the different theories. So hopefully I present them in a well-structured and organized manner for each individual here so that you guys can follow along and it makes sense, and have analyzed all these other theories, so you guys don't have to jump around. And so that the teachers that I'm going to recommend, I think, are very. I mean, I don't think anyone's going to have 100%, but I think they're very good teachers, and I would highly recommend their channels and their teachings. Also, Ambassadors of Christ, AOC Network, I think does a very good job as well. I love a lot of what they teach as well. Those are the people I would recommend. But anyways, they had this teaching on Daniel 8, and they talked about why might Iran attack Turkey. And they talked about the Shia minority. So if you're not familiar with Islam, there's Sunni and Shia are the two large groups. Shia is a smaller group. The Sunnis are much larger. And most countries are ruled by Sunnis, but Shia is more prominent in Iran. So they theorize that maybe the Shia minority attacks the Sunni majority, and it leads to a war and a fight. But because the Sunnis are are larger and have more numbers, that they would actually become eventually the victors. And that may be what happens there. That might be the theory there of what's going on. Interesting theory. I think ultimately, wars and rumors of wars, we need to be very careful. What we need to be really watching for are the events that are really drawing us or suggesting that we're much closer. I think the things we need to be watching for are the covenant is something that we should be considering and watching for, but be very careful because it doesn't necessarily mean what we think, because there's been a lot of covenants with Israel, and it may not be the covenant that we're thinking of. I think the daily sacrifice is definitely a much more strong, when we get to that point where sacrifice is going on and then it's taken away, we got to go, whoa, this really could be it. But we got to be careful because the sacrifices could be reinstituted and another covenant could be made where then the sacrifices are taken away. So we got to be very careful. I think that's why Jesus says this abomination. This is what we really need to be watching for. This, the abomination of desolation, this transgression, this rebellious act is what we really have to be watching for. That's why Jesus refers us back to Daniel. He refers us back into that area to give us more information and context. But as we saw when we were reading, and we were reading about telos, and we were reading about the end, not to worry. We need to not be panicked, terrified, scared of what the events, because Jesus is going to be victorious. God Almighty, Yahovah, is going to be victorious. He knows the end from the beginning. His counsel. And so we don't have to be afraid. We don't have to worry. We don't have to worry about our individual end, our children's end, the world's end. What we need to do is preach Jesus and Him crucified and the resurrection of the dead and what Jesus is going to do. So, anyways, thank you. If anyone is still here with me, um, watching everything. Um, so, if there's any questions, uh, please go ahead and throw those up in the chat. And if you have questions later, if you've watched through all this, praise God. Thank you. This was a really long teaching. I'm sorry. Daniel 8 is actually very complex. There's a lot more that needs to go on with it. And I think because there's been so many poor teachings about Daniel 8. But throw you some questions in the comments. Questions in the comments in the comments. That's what they're there for. I'll interact with people. But again, thank you so much. Once again, I'm Colon Wright, and it doesn't look like there's anything up in the chat. So we will call it a day. You can go get some sleep, get in your Bible, read Leviticus 23, Exodus 40. Yes. All right. Thank you, King Z. Appreciate you once again. You do a yeoman's job being here for 2 hours and 30 minutes. That's just wild. I went so fast. I'm like, oh, I gotta skip this. I gotta skip this. I had so much. I should break these up into two, but I just can't break them up into two. I just gotta I gotta get this out. I just feel the pressure to get this out. So, all right. Well, God bless. Hit me up on WhatsApp, email me, colonwright@gmail.com, or throw something in the comments. All right. God bless. Peace. Take care, everyone.